Hey guys, we are going to be taking a look at the parts of the Earth today, and we're going to start off with page two of our notes. Uh, Before we start on page two of our notes, let's take a moment and think about what makes up planet Earth. What's like everything that goes on planet Earth? Like when I think about planet Earth, I might think about like cities and buildings and people and cars, but I could also think about like plants and forests and even oceans and stuff. But all of that is just talking about what's on the surface of the earth, what's on the outside part. Today, we're going to talk about what's inside the earth. And we're not the first people to ask that question. I mean, if you remember Greek mythology, they talked about Hades, they talked about the underworld. And in a way, that was their way of explaining not only what happens after death, but what's going on deep down inside. There was another guy, not quite as far back. This was in the 1800s. Jules Verne. He was a novelist, and he asked the same question: "What's the center of the Earth like?" And he wrote this great novel. It's one of the early sci-fi novels, and it's a band of adventurers that goes down into the center of the Earth. It was it's such a popular novel that they even made a little 2008 movie, actiony movie. Hold up, is that is that a dinosaur? Well, okay, yeah. It turns out Jules Verne wrote a great story about the center of the Earth. But is the center of the Earth filled with dinosaurs and giant mushrooms and is that a lake? No, no. The center of the Earth and the things underneath our feet aren't quite that exciting. So when we look at it, there's a place that you can go where you can actually see what's inside the Earth, what's underneath our surface. And that would be at a volcano. Now, what is coming out of the volcano is largely what's underneath our feet. And what would that be? That would be lava. That would be, you might have used the word lava. You might have used the word magma. Now, there is a difference between the two. Let's go back a little bit and talk about the difference between the two. They're both words for hot liquid rock. On your notes, there's this place to talk about the difference between these two. So if you need to pause and write this in your notes, go ahead and do that. Lava is the hot liquid rock that got to the surface. So like this stuff coming out of the volcano on the surface is lava. Magma is the exact same thing. It's just still underground. It's hot liquid rock beneath the crust. If I showed you lava and I showed you magma, but I didn't tell you where they came from, you might not know the difference because they're pretty much the same thing. Only they're found in different places. As a matter of fact, the magma down here, as soon as it gets up to the volcano, the instant it gets out, they start calling it lava. Magma and lava are very similar. They're made basically the same stuff, just different places that you find it. Anyways, if you need to pause to do that, feel free to do so. So anyways, the inside of the Earth is hot. And the inside of the Earth, it looks like might have some liquid, maybe different states of matter. So let's start by asking ourselves, what makes up the Earth? Now we are more science minded now, and we can tell that the Earth is made up of different elements, right? So some of the biggest elements in the Earth are things that we've seen before, like iron, oxygen, carbon, but there's also a lot of silicon. Silicon is found in a lot of our rocks, or a lot of our rocks have silicon. Magnesium. Magnesium is also a common element in rocks. And these elements all form, when they get together, they will form up the different things on Earth. Now, when Earth was really young and it was all mixed together, you could find any of those elements anywhere. But what happens to things when you mix them together? Well, sometimes if it has a low density, what will it do? Low density things like like plastics or oil, low density would float to the top. And if I put something high density in there, like this metal bolt or honey, which is a very high density liquid, it would sink to the bottom. Low density sinks. Oh, I'm sorry. Low density floats. High density sinks. So when we look at these materials, things like oxygen, which tends to be a gas, or things like magnesium and silicon, those tend to make lower density things. Now, things like iron and nickel are very high density. So as the Earth was settling in, it did form layers. Some of the high density things sank down to the center of the Earth, and some of the low density things floated to the top. Notice I said center and not bottom, because if you remember, Earth is round. So when things are high density, it sinks to the middle. Low density would float out on the surface. So you guys saw this on Study Island. And we'll talk about this a little more in class. There's two ways to describe the layers of the Earth. One way is by talking about the elements that it's made of. The crust is made of different elements than the mantle. The mantle is made of different elements than the core. Or you could talk about their properties, like the state of matter or what they feel like or things like that. Then you're going to get some different words. They'll divide it in slightly different ways. We're going to talk about all these layers at some point, but we're going to mention these as the basic four. We're going to kind of combine the two. So we've got the crust. The crust is where we live. The crust is the coldest layer. The crust is solid rock. It's farthest away from the heat source. We'll get more on that in a minute. Because it's all the way on the outside, it has the lowest thermal energy. It's releasing a lot of its heat back into the atmosphere, back into space. And because of that, its rock is solid. Now the mantle, on the other hand, if we go down underneath the crust, maybe through a volcano, you might notice that it starts getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter until the rock starts to liquefy. It starts to melt. Now I say the mantle is semi-liquid rock. The reason I say semi-liquid is because I want you to not think about it like water. Water is like really liquid. I want you to think about it like really, really thick liquid. Like if I tried to pour out a glass of the mantle, it would go so slowly. It might even not look like it's liquid at all. It's really thick. It's really kind of like molasses, if you've ever worked with molasses in a kitchen before. The outer core is underneath that. Now, the outer core is also very hot. It's even hotter. So it's very liquid, but it's not made of rock anymore. The rocks, magnesium, silicon, things like that, they are lower density, so the rocks float to the top. But the iron and nickel is high density, so a lot of that has sank down to the bottom. Some of it got trapped in the crust, which is why we can still get to it, but a lot of it's down in the core. The outer core is really, really hot, and it's liquid hot. And the inner core is the hottest layer of all. This center part of the Earth is thousands of degrees. It's absolutely crazy. And it's a bunch of solid iron and wait, what? Wait. The outer core is very hot, and it's liquid. The inner core is the hottest, and it's solid. That seems wrong to me. Well, if that seems weird to you, I see where you're coming from. The inner core is solid because of a very specific reason. We're going to talk about that in the next video. But it's going to call into question some of our ideas of melting point and boiling point. So in the next video, we're going to keep on talking about the core. We're going to talk about some of the other weird things on there.